Amen. Good morning and welcome. How are you guys doing? Good? All right, a little more lively than the first service, so this is good. This is good. It's all those late night graduation parties, though, I think, that are starting to settle in a little bit. Or we accidentally put out decaf. Wouldn't that be terrible? That would be messed up. Hey, if you guys are interested in a Bible, if you forgot yours and weren't able to bring it today, we're handing out a number of those. Though I do encourage you guys, rather than kind of rely on us having them here, to bring your Bible with you every Sunday. You notice we don't put words on the screen for Scripture because we want you guys to have it in your hands, not only on Sunday morning, but throughout the week. But it speaks volumes to your guys' kids or to the kids of folks next to you that when they come in service and they see us sitting there with our Bibles open, pouring ourselves out underneath the authority of God's Word and soaking that in, man, it speaks volume to those who are around. And so that's the church that we want to be, is constantly putting ourselves under God's authority. And holding it in our hands to have it with us is a good way to start doing that. So we have Bibles available, though, if you need them, if you forgot yours maybe this morning. We'd also mentioned maybe trying to find room in the budget to put sunglasses on every seat this morning. We've realized as we go through the Song of Solomon, there's some blushful moments that would be nice to just put a really dark pair of shades on this morning and hide the discomfort that this book is kind of exposing in us. These conversations that, let's just be honest, frankly, we're not very used to having, right? Especially in this sort of an environment. But just to encourage you guys, we didn't find room in the budget for the sunglasses. But nonetheless, that this place is a safe place. And what I mean by that is we're not trying to make it comfortable for you. In fact, a lot of this is, if you will, erotically uncomfortable, right? But this is a safe place where we want to get into God's truth. And as a church family, man, this is both good and challenging to delve into what Paul calls the whole counsel of God, those things that we're not really used to talking about. And as we've gone through this series over the last couple of weeks, we've heard so many remarks and comments from specifically folks in the older generation that are like, man, I wish I heard this 30 years ago. Or like, man, I wish this is what they taught me when I was 17 and trying to figure it out on my own. And so here we have this opportunity, church, to dive into God's Word and what it has to say about these issues, and this is a safe place for this. This is a good and right environment in which to come to God's Word and have these discussions. And so what we've seen over the last couple of works is jumping into the Song of Solomon and kind of in those first weeks seeing this passionate desire of her for her man. We talked about kind of the necessity of both character as well as chemistry and how God has designed us to seek after both. He's not just Redeemer, but also Creator. God has designed these things which are good. And so we studied a little bit about looking for character, but also chemistry. And then the next week, we met her with a bit of her insecurity, right? And Pete preached on how he comes and he just meets her at the place of her need. And how our God is just like that in the same way. He meets us in the place of our most desperate need and insecurity. The things for us that we are helpless to change, he comes and he meets us in that place. And following out of that, we got to talk a bit about roles and how God has designed us with these unique capacities to fill the void in someone else. And how each of us have this void that only a husband or a spouse can fill, and how God's created that all the way back in Genesis for a husband as well as for a wife. But it also we raised our sights to the void of relationship that we've been created for, that God has designed us for relationship. And there's a void in our own lives which only God himself is able to fill. And it pointed us again back to the cross. And this last week, Pete talked a little bit about delayed gratification. Right? Delayed gratification in relationships and saving ourselves essentially for what's best. And you guys remember that little caption, that chorus of the folks that join in, that she speaks to, I adjure you, daughters of Jerusalem, by the gazelles and the does of the field, that you not stir up or awaken love until it pleases. That, church, man, there is a time that is good for this, but it's not a premarital time. It's a time in a context that God has designed. And so even today, we're going to see this passionate desire as well as this holy patience persist as this guy is now going to respond in pursuing his bride. And we'll see this pattern of both invitation and response, this constant call to both listen as well as to look. And we'll see love in full pursuit. A love, church, that is not passive, that desires togetherness. I mean, two people that want to be fully given over to one another. And so once more, we come to the Song of Solomon. Are you guys ready for this morning? Did some of you bring your shades so you guys are ready? All right. We'll pull those out at some select moments in today's rather explicit text. But if you guys are with us, Song of Solomon chapter 2, verse 8. Song of Solomon chapter 2. You find the Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and it's right after that. It's a tiny little book, chapter 2, verse 8. The chase is on. Calls our attention to both listen and look. Verse 8, the voice of my beloved, behold, he comes leaping over the mountains, bounding over the hills. My beloved is like a gazelle or a young stag. Good stuff, right? Good stuff. All right, go be the church, you guys. What is going on in this text once again? The voice of my beloved, listen. Behold, he comes, look. Listen and look. But at what? She's looking, and here comes this crazy momentum that's coming her way. And it's not like some dude kind of pacing through with a little bit of swag in his step or any of that. He's not walking. He's not swagging along. He's not even running. What she calls our attention to listen and to look at is something that is leaping and bounding swiftly in her direction. Now, the white-tailed deer, I did not know this off the top of my head, though I'm sure Ron Stuckey did, can leap literally up to 15 feet high. Now that's crazy, right? That's like jumping over this pole, right? 15 feet's a long way up there. And here she sees this thing that's like a gazelle or a young stag leaping towards her. And there's no obstacle, no mountain high enough, no valley low enough, right? No river, too wide to stop this guy's pursuit. It's swift, it's excited, and the anticipation is closing in. She says that he's like a gazelle or a young stag, right? He's not a little Bambi, right? Fortunately, she doesn't call him like a possum or something like that you just want for roadkill, right? None of that. No, a gazelle or a young stag. Now, what's with the imagery here? It's this picture of both speed and agility, of grace and movement. Like these things can move up to 60 miles an hour. That's fast, right? Cheetahs can run faster, but still, that's really fast, right? And it's this picture of, as one guy puts it, power without violence. Is what you see in the picture of a gazelle and a young stag. This is not a bull in a china shop. And what's interesting is if you see like a young stag running, what do you usually look for? Something chasing it, right? Like what's pursuing, what's making this thing run? But here, there's nothing pursuing this young stag. What's usually prey here is almost like predator. It's not running from something, but it's actually running to something. Better yet, it's running to someone. And there's this single-minded momentum and focus, a passion and an enthusiasm to move in one direction. And that is to get to her, leaping and bounding over the mountains and hills. And so for her, like if you guys were to see something like this coming towards you, like how would you respond? What would be your composure in all of this? And for us here, we don't get to know what she's feeling by any description specifically about her herself, but rather in how she describes this situation. You see, in the Hebrew, there's all these short little breathless staccato sort of statements that she's making. Of like you can tell just by the way she's talking, just like someone that's narrating a football game, they're excited because they're out of breath. They're talking so fast. That's the idea of these little phrases, that her heart is racing, her blood is pumping through her veins as she sees this picture. And all of a sudden, this momentum flying towards her, in one sense, it stops. It stops now. The excitement is still there as we move into halfway through verse 9. She says, behold, look, there he stands behind our wall, gazing through the windows and looking through the lattices. All of a sudden, from leaping and bounding, now he's standing, gazing, and looking. A change has just happened. And now it's us. We get to look through her eyes and spy on him spying on us. You see what just happened here? This is crazy. Now, as well, the Hebrew is plural here for windows and lattices. He's spying through the windows. He doesn't just come and stop and like look through one window. No, he's going from window to window, angle to angle, trying to see her. The anticipation, the excitement is still there as he's going, but he stops. He stops something because there's been something that's now between him and her. The wall, the mountains, the hills, like those were fine. He got over those, but now there's a boundary. And it's not maybe that he can't get through the boundary, but that he simply chooses not to here. There's a boundary to be respected. And it's one in which he does not intrude, he does not barge in, he does not force entry. She mentions he stops and stands behind our wall. Now, who's the our? Is it her and this guy? Well, that wouldn't make sense that he would stop behind this wall if it belonged to him. Rather, this is someone else's wall. If we look and zoom out at the song at large, the our that she refers to is to her brothers and her mother. So this seems to be, he comes from this wild environment outside, and then all of a sudden we're met with, if you will, the domestic environment of the home environment. Oh, a lot of environments in there, right? The domestic enclosure of a home. And he stops and stands outside of this. It's not his wall, so he does not intrude. This is her family. And he's on the other side. She's within, and he's without. He can only get so close, but then something comes between them. Something that at the end of the day, right here, it makes her inaccessible to him. So what's he going to do? What can he do? Well, fascinating enough, and another bit of a little poetic device, we get to hear what he says on her lips. Ladies, do you ever tell stories about what your husband said or did, right? That's what's kind of going on here. We get to hear what he says on her lips. What can he do? Look at this from verse 10 on. He says, "My beloved speaks and says to me, 'Arise, my love, my beautiful one, and come away. For behold, the winter is past, the rain is over and gone, the flowers appear on the earth, the time of singing has come. And the voice of the turtle dove is heard in our land. The fig tree ripens its figs, and the vines are in blossom. They give forth their fragrance. Arise, my love, my beautiful one, and come away. O my dove, in the clefts of the rock, in the crannies of the cliff, let me see your face, let me hear your voice, for your voice is sweet, and your face is lovely. Catch the foxes for us, the little foxes that spoil the vineyards, for our vineyards are in blossom.'" This barrier between him and her, and what can he do? He speaks to her. She says, "My beloved speaks to me and says," and then he gives this invitation that's addressed to a person. But he clarifies the who. He says, "My love, my beautiful one." Two things. First off, who she is. She is his love. We've talked about this before. It's this idea of my darling. There's many darlings in the world, but there's only one, my darling. That's who he addresses. Same word, my love, my darling. It appears 8 times and only in the Song of Solomon, and always when he's speaking to her. My darling. That's who she is. It's this term of endearing friendship and companionship. And that's how he addresses who she is to him. Now, fascinating enough, he does not here call her his bride. Now, he'll do that later, but he doesn't do that until chapter 4, because she's not his bride yet. I believe that this is somewhat, in fact, more of the proposal. That's the kind of pursuit that this is. He's asking her something. And so who he speaks to, but then also what she is to him, my beautiful one. It's how he feels about her. And then he gives this invitation to arise and come away. Arise and come away. 2 things. Come where? Well, come away. With whom? Like he's talking about them coming together. Come with him. Now, when you're young and in love, like going anywhere is exciting, right? Like you can go to the gas station and have the time of your life, right? This is more than just that. He's not just inviting her to the grocery store. He's inviting her to come away, to leave somewhere and come with him. And leave where? Leave the protection of this walled environment, this home that she's in, and if you will, join him in the wild blue yonder. To come away together. I often hear it in the church. We put it this way: to leave and to cleave. From Genesis chapter 2, a man shall leave his father and mother and hold fast to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. So leave the protection and the provision of the home that you're in and join instead with me. And he's not just inviting here. He is passionately urging. And then he explains the why. He's got to give a good reason. Why you should come and why now. And so he'll give 2 reasons. The first he presents as an argument from her perspective. And the second is a bit of an argument from his own perspective. Look at verse 11. From her perspective, he says, "Behold," like look, "the winter is past and the rain is over and gone." See, he invites her because there's a new season of new life at hand. I mean, the dreary cold of winter is past and the warmth of a flourishing spring is right outside the door. A new world awaits them. And spring universally is quintessentially associated with like romance and love. It's the season of romance happens in the spring, and this is what he's inviting her to. A season of beauty and new life in verse 12. The flowers appear on the earth. I mean, the time of singing has come. The voice of the turtle dove, this migratory bird, has arrived. It's heard in our land, and the fig tree ripens its figs, and the vines are in blossom, and they give forth their fragrance. So he appeals to her with his beauty and new life, and he appeals to all of her senses, that she would see the flowers that are blossoming. She would hear the singing and the voice of this turtle dove, that she would taste the figs and smell the fragrance that's there. It sets it in a time of May, June, probably something akin to our season outside that's changing now. And he invites her to this context of beauty and new life. Let me tell you, ladies, if a guy ever invites you to come with him, and I don't mean just like come to the movies, that sort of thing, but from a big picture, to come with him, is he inviting you to a place that's this, a place of life and beauty, a place of health and spring? Is that what he's going to be leading you to? Ask yourself that question. The time of singing and of celebration that's out in the open. There's nothing hidden here. And then he moves from talking about on the earth to in our land, from general to possessive. You see, he doesn't simply want her to come out and enjoy this life. He wants them to enjoy it together. This is our land. Now, it'd be appropriate almost at this point, my wife and I, where we wanted to compose a bit of like a flash mob that would stand up and start singing, "It's a whole new world," right? And so Michelle and Thad, we're going to have you guys do that. It was going to be so awesome. We just didn't have time to put it together. But, shining, shimmering, splendid, right? Like it's this image of like, come out to this whole new world and let's do it together, right? On a magic carpet ride, this whole thing. It would have been perfect. So next time we teach Song of Solomon, there may be a flash mob. But it's this invitation, right, to new life and to new life together, to experience the beauty of this new life. And that's from her perspective. He wants her to look out and to see that beauty and desire it. But then he gives another argument, a second reason why she should come, and he gives it from his own perspective. And guys, he is not shy here about what he wants. He is not at all shy or hidden about what he wants. But as well as that, he is not forceful in trying to get it. Watch this, verse 14. He says, "Oh, my dove, in the clefts of the rock and the crannies of the cliff, let me see your face. Let me hear your voice, for your voice is sweet and your face is lovely." Oh, my dove. Now, we've talked about doves before, right? And if we interpret it by the rest of Scripture, Jesus in Matthew talks about being as wise as serpents and as what? Innocent as doves, right? It's this picture of innocence and purity. And here, well, I think that's part of the imagery, he clarifies a little bit more of what he means here. He says it's a dove in the clefts or the crannies of a rock. You see, a dove is a defenseless creature, right? It doesn't breathe fire. It doesn't have like venomous fangs, right? It can't like whack you with a massive like hammer tail or anything like that. It's an innocent, a defenseless creature. And so what is its defense? Its defense is to be inaccessible to anything else, right? And so they make their habitat in an environment that's up far away, removed from danger. And he says that's where you are. You're removed from me. You're beautiful, but you're inaccessible. You're innocent, but I can't get to you. And so what's he doing? He's inviting her to come down. He's inviting her. It's an invitation. He appeals, he invites, he urges, he praises, he pleads with her that he wants access to her, not just sight. And so he invites her to come down, to choose to be fully his. You see, he does not attempt to gain her by force or cunning. He doesn't try to entrap her or manipulate her or guilt her. There's no negative reinforcement to this. He's simply inviting. He is not threatening her. That's not what he does. What he does is he tries here to woo her I mean, he invites her to a place of life, to experience this beauty together. He's very upfront about his desire. He desires both companionship and her beauty. He says that he wants to hear her voice, that sense of companionship and relationship, of speaking with one another. I mean, the voice of the turtle dove, it just wasn't enough. He wants to hear her voice, the voice of his love. And more than that, he says he wants to see her face. Now, is that the word you guys' translation use? Face. What is that, verse 14? He wants to see your face. Now, this is not the typical word in Hebrew for face. It's not the most specific word that he could have used for face. It's actually more general than that. Maybe some of your guys' translations say form. I want to see your form, or appearance is another way of saying it. And more so, it's not in the singular, it's plural. I want to see your appearances. So what is going on here? Guys, he's not asking for a partial look. What he's saying is, I want to see all of you. I want to see all that you are. I mean, this is a desire that's only to be fulfilled rightly within the context of marriage. But the desire is nonetheless here. He wants to see all of her. And he wants her companionship, to hear her voice. But in the midst of this, we get to verse 15, and all of a sudden, there's a threat. Look with me there. He says, catch the foxes for us, the little foxes that spoil the vineyards, for our vineyards are in blossom. Again, we have to step back and scratch our heads, right? What in the world is going on with the little foxes, right? Guys, when your husband proposed to you, did he talk about the foxes, right? Well, what's going on here? What in the world is going on with the foxes? Now, this is one of those things where we have to kind of zoom out and look at the book as a whole. How has it talked about vineyards and so on and so forth? So how can we decipher what in the world these little foxes are? So come with me on this journey. Now, don't actually turn there, but in chapter 1, verse 6, do you guys remember that she is referred to as a keeper of a vineyard? Remember her brothers get angry with her and they make her keep the vineyard, right? So here's a girl who knows about tending vines. She knows about digging wells, trenching, supporting the vines, and then the harvest and pruning and all of these things. She knows about tending vines, but she must also then know about the dangers that would threaten a harvest. Dangers like foxes that would like to burrow holes underneath the vines, that would disrupt the root system, or would nibble at the blossoms before the harvest has come and thus ruin the harvest. There's this threat that's there. And yet, it doesn't so much, a fox isn't concerned with investing in a harvest, because what a fox wants is just what it wants now, It doesn't care about what it might get come the harvest season. It sees the blossoms and it knows it's hungry, so it just appeases its appetite now. Now, back in chapter 1, she first was referred to as a keeper of a vineyard in a literal sense. But then that literal sense moves into metaphor in chapter 1, verse 6. I'll read it for you guys. She says, "Don't gaze at me because I'm dark, because the sun has looked upon me. My mother's sons, they're angry with me. They made me keeper of the vineyards. But my own vineyard I have not kept." So first it's a literal vineyard, but then she turns it into a sense of a metaphor, where now she's talking about her body and her dark skin. This is part of her insecurity, if you remember from earlier on. And then if that's the case, if now vineyard is something that's metaphorical, not literal, then what foxes would threaten this kind of a vineyard? It says their vineyard that is in bloom. Now, if this blooming is not concerned so much with a literal grape harvest, then what's going on? What kind of foxes could threaten a metaphorical vineyard of blossoming love? What sort of things might threaten them? And then he calls them little foxes, right? Which, scholars are all the panties in a wad over this one. But it seems like little foxes, sorry, I don't know if that was appropriate for preaching. But it is the Song of Solomon, okay? Come on. Put your glasses on, right? Okay. Regardless of the size of the foxes here, don't get caught up on that, right? Regardless of the size of the fox, the threat is the same. They spoil the vineyard. It doesn't matter how big or small they are, they have the capacity now to spoil the harvest. And so one author puts it this way: anything that might ruin the full flowering of their sexual union. These vineyards representing their bodies that are in blossom here. In another way of saying that our bodies are ready for sexual intimacy. So let's not do anything to compromise these blossoms before they reach the fullness of a rich harvest. Let's not do anything to compromise our blossoming love before the harvest. Because you see, his desire here is for her. It's for her and them together, not in the short term, but over the long haul. And so he desires that anything and everything that might stand in the way of that or compromise the full harvest of their love would be dealt with. Because what he's concerned with is the harvest, not just the budding of the blossoms. He wants the good stuff to come. I remember when I was dating my wife, and every time we'd go over to her house to pick her up, as we were leaving, her stepfather would always say, just as we're walking out the door, make wise choices, right? Every time, without fail. Just make wise choices, right? Because here we are going out on a date, and we have a choice to make, right? Are we going to be about the buds or the full harvest to come? And so he'd say, make wise choices. Deal with anything that's going to threaten that. Make wise choices, investing in the long haul. And so this is his proposal to her. How is she going to receive it? How is she going to respond? I remember when I proposed to my wife, it was much more romantic than the Oakland airport, right? It was Point Lobos, and so it was just a super awesome place. We had it all set up and that sort of thing, right? And I go down on one knee, $2 million ring in my hand, trying not to drop in the water. I had to work a long time for that. Okay, it wasn't from a Cheerio box at least, all right? We'll give it that. I thought it was awesome. And so, down on one knee, and I propose and all that, and then her response, she's like, are you serious? No, just kidding, right? No, just kidding. No, but she responds, right? So how's this girl going to respond? Let's see what she's got. Verse 16. Now, this verse is possibly one of the most beautiful verses, I think, in all of the song. You guys ready? Verse 16, first line. My beloved is mine, and I am his. Church, what she's saying here is much more than, let's go steady. No, this is a permanent loyalty. This is covenant language. All the way back from Ezekiel 37 and Jeremiah 32, when God rescues his people and says, I will be your God, and you will be my people. Covenant loyalty and fidelity to one another. I will be wholly yours, and you will be fully mine. Like what Paul says in 1 Corinthians chapter 7, speaking about husbands and wives, he says, the wife does not have authority over her own body, but the husband does. And likely the husband does not have authority over his own body, but the wife does. And not just their own bodies for sexual intimacy, their own bodies to be used to serve and be fully given to one another. I am my beloved's, and he is mine. This totality of fully giving yourself to one another and to none other. I am my beloved's, and he is mine. Mutual devotion, mutual paralleled passion, this monogamous fidelity to be given to no one else. This is the pursuit of true love, a covenant kind of faithfulness, a sentiment that's not just reserved for the honeymoon, but all lifelong throughout marriage, to be fully given over to the other and to fully have the other all to oneself. Carries on until death. It challenges any sort of notion of male dominance as well, doesn't it? I mean, this sort of dominance that's plagued us from the fall where men oppress their wives. No, it says here that I am fully yours and you are fully mine. We are given completely to one another. That I possess you just as much as you fully possess all that I am. I put on par here. And so each gives themselves unreservedly to the other. I mean, there's no ifs and thens, like if you do this, then I'll be yours. There's no contingencies. I mean, this is for richer or for poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do us part. Come what may, I am my beloved's, and he is mine. All right, you guys ready? Put on your glasses, okay? Because here's where you're going to need them. Halfway through 16. He grazes among the lilies. He grazes among the lilies. Again, what in the world is going on with the lilies? All right. Now, lilies, we talked about them a few weeks ago, and lilies appear all throughout the Song of Solomon. And if we interpret here what she uses lilies to refer to later on, is that it's always referring in reference to like a part of her anatomy. In one chapter, lilies refer to her breasts, in another, her lips, in another, her abdomen, and in another, seemingly even her genitalia. This is what lilies refers to. But here, it's without any sort of particular anatomical reference. So it doesn't seem to be something specific, but rather her whole self. He grazes upon the lilies, which refers to her whole self. So what she's saying here is to graze upon the lilies is an invitation to partake of, if you will, all of the pleasures that she is able to give him. To say that I am fully yours. It's a response to his proposal as well as to his request to see her form or her appearances. She says, I am completely yours. So he invites her, like, come out and see the flowers. And then she responds like one up in that, like, I'll be your flower, come graze on me. And lest this not be explicit enough, keep your glasses on and move into chapter 17. Verse 17. Until the day breathes and the shadows flee, turn, my beloved, be like a gazelle or a young stag on cleft mountains. Until the day breathes. It's this image of the morning breeze that comes in. And the shadows flee, or like as the sun rises up, the shadows flee as the sun comes up and the light fills the land. It's saying until then, until the morning breeze comes and the sun rises to cast out the shadows. And this would make sense because the very next passage, starting in chapter 3, it takes place at night. So this is moving in to the evening, if you will. She says, until the day breathes and the shadows flees, all night long, in other words, turn. Now in Hebrew, it can mean turn away or turn to. So what does it mean here? She says, I believe, turn to me and be like a gazelle or a young stag. Now, there's a bit of an inclusio going on here where she talked about him like a gazelle or a young stag at the beginning, and now she'll do it here again at the end of this text. And what was that gazelle doing in the beginning? Leaping and bounding, pursuing her, coming to her. And so now this invitation of all night long until the morning, turn to me, pursue me like a gazelle or a young stag upon cleft mountains. Now, what in the world is happening? Now, your translation may say Mount Bether. Now, that's trying to just transliterate this Hebrew word, but there's no place that has since been found since as far back as we know of a place in Israel called Mount Bether. Now, the Song of Solomon does have a tendency to refer to very specific geographical locations, but this is not one which we know about. And so it doesn't seem that she's referring to a geographical location, but rather to an anatomical one. What is she saying? The root word for Mount Bether is this idea of split, the idea of cleft also, or of cleavage. All night long until morning, turn to me and be like a gazelle, pursue me, not one leaping and bounding over mountains and hills, but upon the cleft mountains. Guys, this seems to be an unambiguous invitation to spend the entire night upon her breasts. Glasses on, right? Her response is to be fully giving herself to him. It's this movement from over the mountains to on the cleft mountains, a movement from gazing through the windows now to grazing on her. She says, I want to make love to you all night long. I mean, it's unambiguous. I want you in every way that you want me. And where she extends this invitation, I believe it reflects her desire. Because here's the thing. The next scene takes place at night, but she is alone that night. That's why she wakes up in this dream that we'll see, and she's scared because her beloved is not there. She wakes up alone. The scene after that begins the wedding ceremony, when Solomon, this guy, is coming to her in this wedding procession. And then after that, in chapter 4, verse 6, immediately following a reference to her breasts, he says this, "Until the day breathes and the shadows flee, I will go to the mountain." And there he says of myrrh and the hill of frankincense. Now again, we got to zoom out and understand the whole book, because earlier in chapter 1, she talked about this mountain of myrrh with a sachet that lied between it. That it was like a sachet of myrrh that lied between her breasts. And here in chapter 4, he's still saying, I will do that. That is something yet to come. That'll be the exciting text of Song of Solomon chapter 5, right? In which case, bring a full face mask, all right? But she's saying essentially this, her desire here is unambiguous. It's completely out there, and yet there's this sense of delayed gratification once more, where there's no textual evidence that this is fulfilled yet. The next night she's alone. After that he comes for the wedding. After that he says, I will do it, and then after that we'll see that it is done. And yet there's this extreme sense of mutual desire. This passion one for the other, to become one, to be fully given to the other. I mean, it crushes any notion that passion in marriage is unnecessary. One guy, he writes this, he says, passion is not the only or the most important thing, but it is a thing of great significance that God himself has built into us as human beings. It is not the main thing, it's not the most important thing, but it is a thing, and a thing of great importance, this kind of passion one for the other. The desire to be together, unrestrained and fully given to one another, to allow the pulse of your affections to be constantly felt by the other, to consume your every thought, to desire to draw near one to the other, to abandon oneself fully and to own the other completely. This desire that is God-given. And church, I do not believe in any way that this is lewd or dirty or filthy. Now, the world takes these things and that's what it does with them. But here in the context of the pursuit of covenant love, they desire to give themselves fully to one another. God is showing us what this desire looks like in the right context. I mean, physical desire and pursuit. Because, church, true love is a passionate love. It's not a passive love. It's not a stale kind of love. True love desires togetherness. This tenacious longing to have the other, this excitement for the two to become one, fully surrendering oneself, to be given over to the enjoyment of the other. True love is a passionate love, and it's modeled here for us. And next, true love is an invitational kind of love. It's not forceful. It's not intrusive. It does not barge in, but there's a harmony of invitation and response. A covenant kind of love that is a pursuit for the other, not the pursuit of something from the other. And a pursuit which is fully willing to deal with all the foxes, anything that might compromise the full flowering of that love and blossom. Be it guilt or shame or fear or past relationships, or sexual immorality, to deal with whatever it is so that this love can have its full blossom. So he stands with this proposal to her, will you arise and come away with me? This passionate invitational love, and she responds covenantally of giving herself fully to him. This invitation and this response. Now, for me, it's been fascinating going through the book of Song of Solomon, and so challenging to try and figure out what this poetry means. And I do absolutely believe that God wants to redeem us and our relationships. And it is the sort of a handbook on relationships. And so all the little micro phrases that are in this poetry have significance and meaning. We've talked before about how we want to be very careful not to take all the tiny little details and try to allegorize them, to avoid the uncomfort of what's there, right? The cleft mountains. To avoid the uncomfortable, we want to just say, well, it doesn't mean that. It really means something more spiritual. So let's just get to that. I think there is this sense of the physical that's right out there for us to learn from. And on the micro level, I was talking to a friend this past week, and he's like, it's not in the raisins, the deeper spiritual meaning. Like, you remember last week, the raisins? It's like, refresh me with raisins, right? We're not trying to what do the raisins teach us about Jesus, And it's not down on the micro level that we find that. But I do think the more as I study this book, and I'm just learning in progression with the rest of you guys, that on a macro level, that there is this sense of allegorization that's going on. And we can zoom out, and it's teaching us things about love and relationship which point us to something greater than the mere physical. Because, church, I absolutely believe that there is a lover who loves you like this. And guys, I say this to you as well as to the girls. There is a lover who loves you like this, who does not just want to gaze from a distance, but he's going to burst through every wall and hindrance that maybe your sin or your guilt or your shame has placed between you and him, and he comes leaping and bounding over the mountains in pursuit of you because of his passionate, great love for you. However inaccessible your sin may make you, he erects a cross and comes to break down the barriers of sin and shame. So a curtain that separated you from God is torn top to bottom in half, and you have access now to God as he has access to come out and to be with us, his people. There is a God who loves you with this kind of passion, and there is no passion that's greater than the passion of Jesus Christ to make you his bride and to perfect you as his bride. So he invites you. Like he does in Matthew 11, he says, "Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you. Learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly of heart, and you will find rest for your souls." He says in John chapter 10, verse 10, that the thief comes to steal and kill and destroy, but I have come that you might have life and have it abundantly. This is the passionate love of Jesus that pursues each one of you this morning. He pursues you. He invites you to respond. So the question is, how will you respond? Would you pray with me? Our Father in heaven, we come to you in full recognition that the vastness of your love, Jesus, is ever deepening for us, that it reaches to the lowest grave. It comes to us this morning to places of shame and guilt, to barriers that we have erected to keep you out, Lord. And yet you come leaping and bounding towards us, desiring to make us your own, fully given to us, Lord, and to fully have us as your own. Jesus, this is such a beautiful picture of the gospel and how great your love is for us. God, that you would pursue us. No matter how far we would run, no matter what wall we would put up, Jesus, we worship you because your love is passionate. Because, Lord, you invite us to be your own, to bring us to a place of life and togetherness with you, Jesus. And so we come to that place today, Lord. And each one of us has to decide. So, Spirit, I pray you would convict us of sin and righteousness and judgment, that you would comfort the broken, Lord, today, that each of us would respond with yes and I do to be the bride of Christ, to experience this love that you have for us. God, I pray that our response of worship and fully giving ourselves to you would be just as tenacious as your pursuit of us. We love you, Jesus. And we say yes, and I do.